We'd love to tell you what this podcast is about, but the truth is, we don't know. The CW Pod, at home on Iowa Everywhere. From the Channel Seed Studios, this is Iowa Everywhere.
Channel Seed, seedsmanship at work.
All right, welcome to this week's CW Pod here on Iowa Everywhere. Of course, we're in the Channel Seed Studios, and we are presented, as always, by our friends at Circa Resort and Casino. Download that Circa Sports Iowa app today. Rick, so two guys named Chris. I don't know if you guys had seen our tweets. It has been delayed a day. Hassel's dad is staying in the room that Hassel podcasts in. So if we did a show today, it would be like Don Hassel like snoring in the background. So we couldn't do that today. So I'm doing the CW Pod early this week to give you guys something to chew on. And I'm really excited. A guy who I've always really looked up to in the industry. I think he's one of the best that the state of Iowa has to offer. And a buddy of mine, and we're going to talk about the industry, his career. We'll get into some realignment, the Hawks, and whatnot. Scott Dochterman from The Athletic joins me today. Hey, Scott, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Hey, Chris, I'm glad to be with you on your new venture. It looks really cool. I'm doing well. You know, it's spring in Iowa. It was 83 or whatever it was on Friday, and then it was snowing yesterday. So I guess just close your eyes and it all changes.
Yeah, I'm doing the Little League softball coaching venture right now, and it's funny. The girl, so they're like 8, and they were all complaining it was too cold. At the one practice, they were complaining that it's hot. And I was like, ladies, just wait, because next week it's going to be like snowing on you. They don't quite grasp what our weather's like here in the state. Looking forward to this conversation. I just have so many different directions that I want to take this with you. I want to do this realignment because I think we're going to have a really eventful off season. I think something's going to happen. I don't know what. I'm not arrogant to know exactly what happened here, but I feel like the tectonic plates have not stopped shifting anything. Mm-hmm. Talk to you about having a front row seat for Caitlin Clark and this women's basketball phenomenon that we've seen in our state. And I want to talk about just the media. I mean, something we're doing right here is, I don't know, it's something I've had in mind for about 5 or 6 years or so, but it's actually come to a reality. And you've been the guys, really, Scott, that I think has done a fantastic job of navigating the media cycle throughout your career. So let's kind of start right there. For those who... When did you get your start? Did you start at the Seeds Gazette, or were you somewhere before that? What year was your career kind of launched here?
Wow, you're going all the way back to 1992, Chris, and that was my senior year of high school. I'm from Burlington, Iowa, down on the southeast part of the state, and I was actually for 3 years, I was working for the high school newspaper, but I was also playing sports. I was playing quarterback for the Greyhounds. You can see my jersey hanging from the background. You know, I realized pretty early that I wasn't going to be in the NFL, so I better make do with what comes next. And sports writing was something that I really enjoyed and really started to follow. And my senior year of high school, it was kind of funny. I was out for soccer just for the heck of it because we just got it. It was like the second year that Burlington had it. And my aunt worked in advertising at the Burlington Hawkeye newspaper, which is actually older than the University of Iowa itself, and said that they had an opening for a part-time gig. And that's something that I kind of wanted to go into. And I thought, all right, I'm going to give that a shot. And I got it and realized after about 3 or 4 months, I was too immature to take calls at, from 7 to 11:30 at night on Tuesdays and Fridays and Saturdays, because I just want to be out partying. I was 18. Yeah. I was wild. But I came to my senses after a couple of years, got through with it. And then I graduated in 97 from Western Illinois University, and got my first gig at Muscatine, covering high schools Did that for 2 years. Enjoyed it a lot. Burlington and Muscatine back in the old days of the MAC, were big rivals, and so I was aware of it. I didn't really like Muscatine as a town until I moved there, and it grew on me. I spent a year in Fort Dodge, and I covered police and county government.
Wow.
There. My wife also worked there. She worked in lifestyles at the Messenger. And an interesting part about that was, first of all, I think as a journalist, maybe it was one of my more formative years, because I learned how to report news. Because one thing that's easy about covering college sports is you have all access to all the information you need. That you have availability of players, you have you have stats, you have all this stuff. Well, when you're covering police and county government, especially the police part, people don't want to talk to you at all. So you got to learn how to report the news. And I saw some really bad things, but I got through with it. I spent a year there. Then I moved to St. Joseph, Missouri, and worked there for 6 years as sports editor. And I covered the Kansas City Chiefs while I was doing it. And that was really important for me because it enabled me to get out of my comfort zone, out of the state of Iowa, and work. And then I came back, went to the Gazette in 2006, stayed there through 2016, did a lot of different things there. Started off as kind of like sports enterprise and investigative, then morphed into a beat writer when we had some down to cuts. And then spent 2 years at Land of 10, which was an ill-fated operation by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Cox Media Group. That was not a very good, well-run place. It was even more miserable than that on a personal level. And then for the last 5, I've been with The Athletic, which I absolutely love. It's been the best place I've ever worked.
I love The Athletic. I love what it stands for. I'm kind of a guy who just, I guess I really respect disruptors. I've always looked up to that place just because it was so fresh. Our industry was so rocked, and it still is, by I just want to read a story without having 15 ads pop up in my face. And the Athletic, to me, was one of the first waves in sports where it was like, we had gotten to kind of this like Napster type of generation where we didn't want to pay for anything. Like my generation, really, because that's how you grew up in the internet. Everything was free on the internet. I mean, even back in the day, right, Scott, like the newspaper, it's like you had to pay to get a newspaper delivered to your door, but all the stuff was free on the internet for a while, I believe, because they didn't have the technology for subscriptions and stuff. And the Athletic rolls around, and you guys are like, hey, no, we're charging a subscription, but you can actually read your articles in peace. You can, and you guys you went deeper in depth. I can't, you're like, we're not doing gamers anymore. We're doing this for the real sports fan. And like, I just really respected it when it came out, and it's been a blast to see how that thing's kind of evolved over the years.
Yeah, that's what I love about it, Chris, because when when I worked at newspapers, and I did so for 20 plus years, you're confined by time, space, all that sort of stuff. You've got this finite amount of space in a newspaper that you can write to, and then and that's it. So, hey, I went to this great game, but hey, we've got room for 500 words or 15 inches or whatever. And it's like, that's all you can write. Well, we're not confined by that. That doesn't mean we should write 5,000 words on a typical Tuesday night basketball game or anything. But what we can do is we can dive deeper into the topics and the subjects. And because, everybody watches the games, fans watch the games. It's really about what else is going on that we're trying to really dive deep into it. And if there's a game, hey, every team, every Power 5 team plays a layup. You're supposed to win those games. Sometimes you lose, but most of the time you win. People don't really care to read about how Iowa State dismantled SEMO in the opener, but they want to know, okay, how did this team look? What did you like? What are you concerned about? How did Xavier Hutchinson perform? Catching the passes. What did Hunter Deckers look like? Those are the things that people are most interested in, just like any other team in any other part of the country. So we try to say, okay, well, we're going to go in that direction, but then come back later with something even bigger and better. So I really like that about us, that we're not beholden to the daily story. I did that a lot, especially with like Iowa basketball. When I covered Iowa basketball, it's like I got to come up with something every single day. And after a while, they all run together. We don't worry about that. We just want to get the best stories we can on a frequent basis.
Well, and it's turned into, and I don't know if this was the vision at the beginning, but it's like you're all on one publication, but it's almost like a network too, because you're the Iowa guy. Okay, some story breaks, and you've got your national guy who can call you and make you almost like a source in the story because you guys go to the experts that are local, which is what I like about it. And like just my example, I'm a huge Atlanta Braves fan. It's probably my favorite franchise, and you guys went out and hired my. I was an Atlanta Journal-Constitution subscriber for the longest time, and like I can get all my sports in this one spot. I love it. I'm a big admirer of it. How has it gone with the New York Times? How has that ownership changed things, if at all?
It has a little bit. We've been a little bit sanitized, a little bit more than normal. Things like I had to sign a social media policy, which before I didn't have to. Things like swearing in stories, they have to go through a little bit rigorous process, and now it's more the hyphens rather than the words. That kind of stinks a little bit, and then the length of the stories, they have to be more justified if you want to go longer than, whereas before it was just like, yeah, that's okay. So they've kind of shoehorned us in, but not a lot. I mean, we still operate completely differently, and it's just kind of those guidelines, and sourcing is a little bit more rigid, which you'd expect. But some of the best things we do is especially in college sports, is get behind the scenes. I mean, when we were doing those, the state of the program stories, and then we would talk to an assistant coach or somebody who knew the program. Those are some of the best read things we could get is, what does this assistant coach about a program within the conference say about this team on record, without using their name. And we got to be concerned a little bit about that.
Well, you can't really tell either. And I read The Athletic. I open it up. It's one of the first things in the morning, and it's always the last thing I read before I go to bed. And I can't really tell. The New York Times is fascinating to me too, in the sense that it seems like, you look around and everything is being, dilutive when it comes to local media, at least. And, there's a lot of really bad companies in our industry that are now owned by like hedge funds. They don't care about the journalism. They don't care about the people. The Times just keeps growing, and I'm fascinated in 10 years what the New York Times will be, because it's like, oh, maybe I like, for instance, the other day I wanted to make these pork tacos on my smoker.
Yeah.
My wife made a request, and I typed in recipe, and the New York Times was the first thing that popped up. It's like, it's just, that company to me is fascinating, like where that company might be in 10 years.
They've done a great job overall of building its online base and taking the next step and maintaining its, what most people would consider journalistic integrity. Other people who have different views would disagree, and that's fine. But no, I mean, I like the way that they've done it, and I was thrilled when they bought us, because I think there were a couple of gambling companies that were involved. But the fact is that we are able to maintain our kind of journalistic integrity and our independence to some extent. I think is something that's really important. I think to the readers, because they don't want to see a lot of changes. They don't want to see a lot of necessarily politically based stuff, but they also don't want to see gotcha headlines or anything like clickbait, like, oh, Kirk Ferentz and Iowa cheerleaders, they don't want to see anything like that. And I don't blame them. That's not ethical.
So you've been there. I mean, you've been covering Iowa since 2006, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, really about the same time as me. I started at Iowa State at 2004. So we have similar, but you've had a different experience because you've only covered one football coach, and you've basically covered what, two basketball coaches?
3. I got there for the last year of Alford.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I did do a little bit of in the 90s when I was in Muscatine. I did come over. I did write about, Hayden a few times. I covered some games and stuff. I wasn't really intense, but it was the small school or small town newspaper that came over for games and a couple of press conferences. So, and plus I've been aware of this program for 40 plus years. So
Yeah, I guess like more from like a journalist standpoint, it's fascinating to me when a program. So Mike Palm from Circa he has like this theory about Iowans that we just as like fans that we just will hold on to coaches forever, like because he always uses Iowa as an example with Bluter, McCaffrey, and Kirk. It is really interesting on the inside when you have to work and cover a coach for as long as you have, because I always tell people that coaches, like when they first get to a place, they're awesome. They love the media. They want to be as accessible as possible. And then they're going to have their first face of adversity where they're criticized, and then they get jaded, and then they start to shut down, and then they'll usually lose, and they'll all of a sudden try and open things back up because they need some positive press. And what has that been like for you, being at the same place for so long, covering really the same people, because there hasn't been much turnover? I think it's fascinating the ups and downs that must have been that you've seen with those relationships.
Yeah, they've been really fascinating. I mean, let's start with football. It's the primary sport anyway, and Kirk has been there the longest of anybody in the country. And he, I would say when I got there, he was just coming off like their really big surge, where they won 10 games 3 straight years and kind of went down a little bit. But it got testy there for a few years, and then he built them back up. And I would say the relationship at that point was pretty hands off and pretty standoffish from Kirk. He was very much at an arm's length, and it was hard to really get a read on it, which I think what coaches are really acceptable, what they don't realize is that we're in some ways, we used to be kind of the combative people maybe 25, 30 years ago, or the people they had to worry about. The fans are much more knee jerky than the media is, especially in this state. In this state, I think coaches should look at media as, we're a buffer, we're a filter, you're not going to see pot shots taken at them.
Great point.
Look at a couple of years ago with when Steve Prohm was the coach. That could have been an issue where when you're 0-18 in the league, people can rip you to shreds. I didn't really see that. I mean, there was more of a realization of things going the wrong way, but it wasn't just like it would be in a lot of other markets. Same thing over here. So I think with Kirk, what he realized after he had this, it was really a stale period, about 5 years from 2010 to 2014, where they were like 34-30 overall. They lost all 4 trophy games. Attendance was going down, and he got really kind of salty at times. And he realized, we called it New Kirk. They got better, more impactful or better relationships and stuff. And for me, when it comes to football, my whole view is to be fair. Yeah. Is to, if I'm gonna come at you, if I'm gonna bring something up, it's gonna be because the facts back it up. And no greater. There are 2 issues that have over the last couple of years that have really come to forefront on this, and that is Brian Ferentz and the offense, and then you also have the racial discrimination stuff from 2020. And when that happened in 2020, we're just trying to get our bearings, what's going on here. And I used as my primary tenet the players' parents, and former players, all African American. And I wanted to get as much information as I could behind the scenes, and then also on record too. And the majority, and an overwhelming majority, were there are issues here. They need to be corrected. Chris Doyle is the problem. We think we're not sure if Kirk can do it, but we think he ought to at least have the opportunity to try to correct these. That was kind of the general underlying theme. And that's kind of what I ended up writing. Was I thought this is more the story to me than Iowa's racist, get rid of the coaches, because that's easy, knee jerk, what's going on there. And and so that's kind of the vein I took. And I thought that was at least the fair way to go. Now, people criticize me on both sides that I was too tough on Kirk or I was too light on Kirk. And, but that's the way I took it. And then with Brian Ferentz in the offense, there's a lot to blame there. But what I looked at was there are so many issues here that are beyond his control. It's not just him. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to lose his job or anything like that. I'm just saying that the offensive line was terrible because in 2018-19, they've lost all their players, all their offensive linemen were gone. They had one scholarship receiver available. What are you supposed? You have a quarterback who is very inaccurate, great guy, but very inaccurate. What do you do? And he can't do a whole lot himself. So when I look at this, I'm like, well, what are the areas where I think he is subpar? And the one that I came down to was, and this took a lot of time, was to go through the red zone numbers. And the fact was 4 times in the last 2 years, they've thrown the ball when they're inside the 10-yard line, they've thrown the ball into the end zone. That to me tells me that's schematic. That's coaching. Yeah. That's the coordination. So that is a problem when you're always settling for field goals in the red zone.
It's fascinating to be on the front lines of that racial discrimination suit too. And that was such a polarizing time in our country. You had COVID, you had the Black Lives Matter movement throughout the country, and then that happened. And that had to be really hard to be on the front lines to cover, I would think, because it doesn't matter. I would guess, Scott, and I wasn't in your mentions, it didn't matter what you wrote. People will read it and take it the way they want to based on their political ideology. Is that fair? I mean, is that how it went down?
Largely, yes. And then you threw on the fan component where early on, I mean, I would say that nationally or people outside the Iowa purview were pretty strongly against Iowa for this, like clean house, this is a racist program, all that kind of stuff. And then you had the diehard fans who want to believe anything. This isn't true. This is this is that. And then you had, as it went on, as the investigation went on, and you're still reporting it, people are getting really fed up. They want to know, they want to see this concluded because, their favorite team is getting its ears boxed quite a bit. So it was tough. I think towards probably once we got past the 4th of July, which was about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks after the fact, that's when fans started becoming more threatening. And that was hard for me and some of the other reporters that I work with. I would suggest one of my best friends in the industry, Mark Morehouse, really became burnt out, and he ended up leaving the industry a couple months later. And it was a very challenging time, but I think you also had to be honest. And my whole summation was, we're still going to use the Hush Blackwell report as the primary basis of what ends up coming out of this thing. And it suggested that, is it racist or racial insensitivity? Those are two things that I'm a white guy from Iowa. So are you, Chris. I don't know exactly how to characterize it in a way that makes sense or to rationalize it for somebody who is not like me, because I'm not like them. I haven't experienced it. I don't know what it's like. So therefore, I've got to try to build off those relationships with people who are like that and let them kind of tell their story and guide me in a direction and still be fair. And that was very difficult. And it was difficult throughout the year. The thing was, we just decided, at the Athletic, was we're just going to continue to build this fairly, because if the majority of the former players and the majority of the parents and stuff said, look, they got to change, they got to make changes, this is terrible, and that's really the path that they need to take. But when the majority of them, and I'm not saying all of them, because there were some that were like that, but the majority was like, we really like Kirk, we really like a lot of the coaches there. They've had some issues, and we know that, but that they should get the opportunity to try to correct them. And when they did, then those same people, I keep coming back to them just conversationally. It doesn't have to be a transactional relationship. You just, find out a little bit more. And they're like, oh yeah, I think things are better. They're not perfect. They never will be, but things are better. They're allowing them to do this. They're allowing them to do this. They weren't before. Then I think you just kind of allow it to move. And then the lawsuit part of it was different altogether. And the conclusion of it was politically motivated. And that's probably why I think Kirk and the coaches will be more guarded this year, because it should have went to trial. And but the state and Brenna Bird pushed for a settlement above that of the university didn't want it. None of the defendants wanted it, but the state attorney general's office wanted it. And so the neat thing for them was not only they forced that settlement, then they put enough political pressure out there to force Iowa Athletics Department to pay their summary of it, or pay their portion when they didn't want it to begin with. So
yeah.
So it's kind of like, we're gonna, the phrase a few years ago, we're gonna build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. That's kind of what Iowa did here, which is, we're gonna make the settlement and we're gonna make you pay for our part of it.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Morehouse, another guy I love. Great dude. And that's another area I wanted to go with you here, because how I always have a really love-hate relationship with fans on Twitter, because one, without fans we wouldn't have jobs, right? Like, they're the ones paying for this stuff, and their passion is what makes college athletics go. But there's an interesting thing that happens now that didn't happen even 10 years ago. And it's when the team loses a game, sometimes alcohol is involved. The media is kind of like the go-between for the fans and the coach or the athletic director or the quarterback or whoever they're mad at. And for the most part, I feel like I have pretty thick skin. I've done talk radio. I've taken my shots, and for the most part, you can move on. There is a human being aspect of it too, where it just gets kind of, it does wear you out. You do get fatigued by the hate, and it's not necessarily the majority of people, but they're the loudest ones that generally come at you. How have you dealt with that over the years? And has there been a point where you thought, maybe I'm going to get out of this because it's just not fun anymore from that aspect?
Yeah, when the team's losing or goes on a losing streak or is not performing well, then that's when it gets really nasty. And I would say last fall was probably the worst. Especially right around the time of Illinois and Ohio State, when Iowa lost by 3 to Illinois. But just the way the offense was performing, it got really. I understand fans have nowhere else to vent. They can't just walk up to the locker room, knock on the door and start, but I think what they see or what they interpret, what they want us to do is channel their anger and aggression towards the coaches. Like, I always look at it like Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men, I want the truth. That's what they want from a press conference. And it's not like that, because they certainly wouldn't want that if the team was winning. But after a while, we get it. And I'm sure it happens in Ames and Lincoln and everywhere else, but people start, they flex their Twitter muscles and, you guys need to start asking some tough questions.
Tough questions. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ask the tough questions. We get it.
Yeah. And I mean, we do, we just don't ask them in a, sometimes not necessarily in a confrontational way. Because we deal with these guys every, and especially during the season, multiple times a week, after good wins and bad, you've got to be the same. You've got to remove that emotion, and fans want that emotion. They want somebody to stand up and go, why won't you fire Brian Ferentz? But that's not going to be the case. Now, we've asked multiple times, would you ever consider replacing Brian Ferentz? Would you, things like that. And it's the answers that antagonize them more than anything. So they still don't have any place to put their anger, their aggression, because the multiple ways are they could just quit going. They could be apathetic. They're not quite there yet. or they could find another way to vent. And it's usually to us on Twitter because we're kind of the go-between. And last fall got really to the point of, I'm just sick of this shit, or I'm sorry, this stuff.
No, you can cuss. We're on the internet. You can say shit.
Okay.
Say
gotcha.
whatever you want, Scott. Drop an F-bomb if you want, buddy. That's the glory of this platform.
All right. I like it. I like it already. I just don't know the venues on some of these stuff. But
it was the Prom 0-19 year where I legitimately wanted to quit. I wanted to get out.
Mm-hmm.
I really did. I actually thought about it I had to take I legit went out to Colorado in a cabin by myself for 5 days. I just, because it had gotten so toxic, and it was right, during the pandemic, there weren't any fans there, and people are just sitting around, and they, it's no wonder alcohol sales were through the roof that winter, right? And this is all real stuff, and I had real sympathy for people because all they wanted was to watch. I always say basketball is a very proud fan base, right? And they very passionate, and you can't even win a game, and I get it. You can say, "Oh, I have thick skin," all you want, but the negativity still can wear a guy down. I think is the way to put it.
Right, because it's not necessarily directed at me, but it's just continuously negative. I always considered myself the community bartender on Twitter. And, so it's belly up, tell me your concerns. I'll come over, I'll talk, blah, blah, blah. Well, if somebody walks in every single day to bitch about their job or their wife or their, where they live, their car or whatever, after a while, you're like, dude, what am I supposed to do here? I can listen to you for a while. It's like you don't even have your friends or somebody just continuously bitches. You're just like, I'm tired of this shit.
I think the hardest part for me is that when in a spot like that, or even Iowa State football last year, and granted, I'm not really doing this day to day like you do anymore. Jared kind of heads that up for us. So, but I'm going off of my experience. So you're getting it from fans, which is okay. I love the fans because they're the reason all this works. I acknowledge that, but again, we still have to be honest and open here, and it does affect you. But then you go to do your job, and everybody's negative because they're losing. So you're getting hit in every direction where there's no positivity, and man, those years you just beg for the season to come to an end.
Yeah, or because even when you're out commiserating with your fellow scribes or reporters or people on the beat, it all centers around what you're covering, and so you're still and so it's all your negative experiences and you're recycling them, and it's after a while it's man, I got to get out of here, I got to do something different. And so what always what probably gets me the most pissed, frankly, is when I was watching something NFL related or something, and then I'll comment on wow, that was a great call, and then somebody will say, well, that's something Brian Ferentz wouldn't call. I'm and I'm trying to get away from that, just and I'm so I'm just not even going to tweet. I'm just going to sit and watch this, but I'm making it sound really negative here. Overall, my experiences on Twitter are great. Met a lot of great people, whether it's Cyclone Fanatic. I think you have some just tremendous, Cyclone Larry's funny. Steph Copley is tremendous.
Yeah, she's great.
She's great. Jared's great. I really enjoy that interaction. And I would say I've met so many great just fans and people who feel the same way or not the same way, or whether it's about life or sports or just anything. Hey, what's the weather like in your area? That it's just it's been a bonus more than it's been a detriment.
I personally enjoyed your reporting on the Iowa parking garage last week.
That about sent me over the edge.
So you report on that Iowa's taken to the Regents, that they want to add this parking garage near Kinnick Stadium. I don't even know all the details, honestly. I didn't really care that much. The only reason I cared is because I have to take my daughter to the hospital 3-4 times a year, and I'm like, how will this impact where I park? That was where my mindset was. And so let me get this straight. I mean, people are just losing their minds on your feed because it's going to impact where they park a game day, or what was the gist of it?
I tell you what, I think there's probably it's not, as much as people care about winning and losing, the most important thing is whether they can get out and get on the road at a decent time after a game. And last week I heard it from all angles, whether they park in that lot, whether they don't, whether they're just generally complaining, saying, well, it's going to take a lot of time to get out of that lot after a game. And just, you're like, no wonder that when there's 4 minutes left in every basketball game, you look up to the concourse at Carver Hawkeye, and there's just a circle of fans, like 3 deep, because they got to beat traffic to get to their cars. And it's like, it's a tie game. Both teams are ranked. It's a Big Ten game, but still, it doesn't matter.
I feel you. When we used to go to Iowa games when I was a kid, we'd drive 5 hours to get there, okay, from Western Iowa. And my uncle would want to leave with like 5 minutes to go in the third quarter to beat traffic. It was like, what are we doing? We drove. Yeah. You got 10 hours in a car and you're leaving, halfway into this thing. That's just how some people are wired. I get it. Like that was my family growing up. I mean, hell, we would be to Des Moines by the time that sound off would start.
It's true. And it's sad. It's the way it is. It's, when I talk to people all the time, it's like, wow, did you see that last, that last second shot, maybe the Bohannon shot in 2018 or whatever it was. And oh no, I was listening to it in the car, it's like, well, that's not the same thing, and like this year. Now, granted, when Iowa played Michigan State, I think they were down like 10 with like 90 seconds left.
Oh yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah. And then Peyton Sanford hits that shot, to send the game in overtime, and there was probably half of the arena was there. And then either the people who were on the concourse or the people who were, somehow streaming back into the arena to get in to watch it for the overtime. And it was just wild, but I probably would have left too if I had tickets. And I was like,
no doubt.
But it was a Saturday afternoon. I mean, what else are you going to do?
All right. I want to do some realignment here. But before, just real quick on the Iowa women's program and Caitlin Clark. I mean, I got a feeling, I've been pretty aware of her for a while being in Des Moines. I was doing play-by-play for the Iowa State women when she was taking visits and stuff. Got to meet her when she was younger. The whole Steph Curry thing, I think, is spot on. It just, do you get a feeling, Scott, when you're covering this and watching her, is this is different than just like, the Murray twins are lottery picks, or Luka Garza or Megan Gustafson? You covered all these amazing players through the years. This one just feels different to me. Where are you at on this?
Yeah, she's a transcendent force of change in the sport and in sports, not just basketball, not just women's basketball, but sports itself. And that is really neat to see, because when you see little boys, like I was at the celebration the other day, just kind of, making sure she didn't say anything about Angel Reese. Yeah. But when I was out there, you're looking at little boys wearing Clark 22. I'm hearing stories of, little boys, and preteens, hitting shots and then going like this. And I was doing it for Jordan, for the Blazers series. They're doing it for Caitlin Clark. That tells me that she is more than just a female women's basketball player. I mean, she's transcendent. When you go on the road and they average 3,600 fans above average at Big Ten venues when Iowa played there. And the lines were astronomical for her autographs that, I'd had anecdotes of fans tweeting at me, hey, I'm wearing red today, but I'm here for 22 for Iowa, or, stuff like that. And it's remarkable that she has this much influence. I mean, and there's no secret. I mean, they have the highest ratings in history. If it would have been LSU and South Carolina, they would have been good too, but not like this.
Yeah, not that.
So she just has the opportunity to bring in so many people under this tent, and she does it in a way where she's got swagger, she's got style, her game is incredible. And then she handles herself in such the right way after the fact. I mean, that thing with Angel Reese could have been a tipping point. And I'm not going to get into who was right, who was wrong, but the way she handled it after the fact,
brilliant.
Just, she's a marketing major. I think she's going to be a multi-millionaire in whatever field she chooses after basketball. But I would anticipate basketball lasting in at least another 10 plus years.
Yeah, no, I would too. I did, as far as your role at the Athletic. So, I mean, up until now, I would say the women's coverage has been small.
Mm-hmm.
Are you kind of like on a Caitlin Clark beat from here on? Because she's one of the most popular athletes in America right now. Mm-hmm. This isn't just an Iowa thing. Like, how are you guys going to handle that?
Well, I probably will cover more about Iowa women's basketball and Caitlin Clark in the future. I did write, fair amount in the winter. I've largely, my job is college football. My primary beat is Iowa. I do some Iowa State from time to time, do a lot of Big Ten. And now I'm really heavy in the draft. I'm writing a story every day on the draft. And tomorrow's Big 12 overlooked prospects. So I've got a couple of Cyclones on that list. But she is, as you said, she is the most popular figure, I think, in college sports today. I think if you were to poll 1,000 people nationally, who do you know more? Caleb Williams from USC, the quarterback who won the Heisman, or Caitlin Clark? I think Caitlin Clark is right there, if not ahead of Caleb Williams. And that's, maybe I'm, not necessarily biased, but I'm just too close to it. But she is just a transformational figure. And that's, to me, says a lot for the sport. It's great that she's in it. It's going to be fascinating to see if she uses her fifth year, her COVID year at Iowa, because it could be a little bit of a tug of war. I mean, once she, if she's here at Iowa, maybe that helps the women's basketball grow and helps Nike grow more, because they need to come out with like an Air logo shoe, by the way.
No doubt. Absolutely. My daughter is a Cyclone through and through, and she would be lined up to buy the Caitlin Clark shoe the day it goes on sale. Yeah.
So wherever she goes in the WNBA, whether it's after 1 year or 2 years, if she's at the Minnesota Lynx, or if she's at the LA Sparks or Chicago Sky or wherever, then they'll find a way to get her to wherever they want her to go. Then I imagine that those jerseys will come off the rack in a heartbeat.
All right, I wanted to wrap up and do a little realignment, something that you and I are both really into. This Yormark from the Big 12 has just kind of stirred everything up since he got there. The Big Ten is hiring a new commissioner. We're in a really weird spot right now, waiting around on this Pac-12 television deal. If it's going to come, nobody really knows. Again, I've learned a long time ago not to make too many predictions when it comes to this stuff, because I genuinely do not know. I think I know what Yormark has up his sleeve and what he wants to pull off here. I also feel like these Pac-12 schools specifically, I do think that they would prefer to stay together and keep it that way if at all possible. I mean, Scott, how do you see this playing out as far as this summer goes? Because I just get the weird feeling like even if the Pac-12 stays together, I don't think Yormark's done. I think he's into this make the Big 12 the SEC of basketball thing. That's why Gonzaga's on the radar. I think we're in for a rocky 3 to 4 months here. Where are you at on all of this?
I think things could change in a heartbeat. I think things can change every day, and they kind of have. And realignment has been the most fascinating and discussed topic in sports in college sports the last 15 years or so. And I was there in Kansas City at I think it was the Renaissance Hotel on the Plaza when it first all broke to hell in 2010. I remember I was the only Iowa reporter there, and I was with the Gazette, and I see Gregory Joffrey bolt the room, and I took off like a bat out of hell after him. And he gets to go on the elevator, and he was getting out his phone. I think he was probably going to call Jamie or something. I cut him off. I got right into the elevator before he did, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm with the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. I need your comment on this." And he didn't want to talk, but he did give me like a comment, and that. So I've been on the ground floor since day one on this, and I think the one thing I think is most fascinating is the Big 12 is the aggressor here, and that's never been the case. That they could stand pat and be a really fun league. Financially, I'm not sure how that's going to all play out. I mean, they've got their contract and that's good, but the big picture in the long term, I'm not sure. But I think when you look at the Big 12, they've been picked apart since 2010. Now they're in a good spot. I think having Oklahoma and Texas, granted, that cost them a lot of money and some prestige, but now you got kind of like-minded institutions,
no doubt.
And it's going to be, again, a really fun league, basketball and football. I mean, all these teams play fun football. Cincinnati's been a good team, BYU, UCF's been in the major bowls, and with the 12-team playoff, they're all going to at least get a shot. And so I think that's really helpful for them. But I think being the aggressor, it just solidifies in the public's mind, if nothing else, that, hey, the Big 12 is not going anywhere. It's not going to disintegrate. It's not going to fall apart. And it's putting a lot of pressure on the Pac-12, which has been kind of a passive league for a long time. And other than when they tried to go the Pac-16 way back when, it's really just kind of been this, ho hum, we're all right where we are. And then they got shocked last summer when the Big Ten took USC and UCLA. But if you're the Pac-12, I think you've got to line something up. If you want to stick together, you better line something up quick. It might only need to be a 5-year thing just to get your bearings. Probably hire a new commissioner at this point, because I don't think your commissioner's being very good. But Washington and Oregon, they're looking for the Big Ten.
See, that's my deal with the Pac-12, and it's my experience with the Big 12 that speaks to me so much. And I couldn't agree more with what you just said. Like, when I look at the Big 12 now, after the last 15 years, it's like, well, where else are these programs going to go? Because they've been turned down by everybody. Nobody wants them. And that's what makes them strong, because they all realize their strength is their togetherness as a whole. And let's say I'm Colorado and Arizona, two schools that are being rumored the most with the Big 12. And we do a 5-year deal with ESPN and Apple and Fox. We're just throwing entities out there. Doesn't matter in this scenario. You still have the long-term worry about Oregon and Washington, because the second the Big Ten decides they want to do that, if they do, they're gone. And that's kind of been the case in the Big 12 forever. It's like, yeah, we're here, and it's fine. The checks are clearing. But you always kind of knew, okay, well, when that grant of rights is up, all hell might break loose. And it did. I mean, shockingly, nobody really saw that coming when it did. But I like where they're at. I think that if this whole thing comes down to, Scott, like, there's going to be 4 leagues at the end, like everybody predicted, I'm confident the Big 12 will be there. And I could also see a scenario where there could be 3 leagues and the Big 12 will be kind of the third one standing if it got to that, because the ACC's thing's really weird, where they have this long grant of rights that doesn't pay them much, but there's all, like, the Florida State, that deal a couple months ago where the Florida State, like, regents were talking openly about, like, their unhappiness with I don't know. There's all these smart, rich people involved, and I feel like I just can't imagine Clemson and Florida State sitting around making, 1/5 of what their rivals in the SEC. I know the grant of rights are strong. I get all of it. I've read them like you have.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I still think that the earthquake is not even close to being settling on how this plays out.
Yeah, you're right. And if you're the Big 12 and the Pac-12 decides to coalesce and have, a 5 or 6 year, new media rights agreement, if they're able to do it, and, not on the CW, but, if they're able to do it, then I think you're okay. I think you're in a great spot. Continue to do what you're doing, showcase your league in the best light possible. So if the Big Ten in 4 or 5 years decides, you know what, yeah, we do want Washington and Oregon, and maybe the 2 other California schools, then hey, open arms. You guys can still come. We're still excited to have Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, the Four Corners schools, Colorado. Welcome back, Colorado. It's been a long time. I think that's great, because if you just keep that open door policy, you can still get what you want. And I don't see, a few years ago, I thought the scenario would have been the Pac-12 grabbing who they wanted from the Big 12.
No doubt.
And it did not turn out to be that way at all. And when you look at the Big 12 and all the success it's had in football, I mean, TCU gets the championship game, and whether it's Iowa State winning the Fiesta Bowl a few years ago, and and on and on. I mean, there's a lot to like about this league. Now, are you going to have to play on different times of the week? Thursday, Friday nights, probably. Are there going to be some games that maybe not paid quite as much as the Big Ten or the SEC? But if you still have a path to the playoff and you still have access to really good players, and if you have good collectives, I don't think that's really going to matter. The only thing that's going to matter is whether or not your athletic department can continue to pay coaches, and that's really a factor.
Yeah, I feel like too that as far as players go, listen, like I know there's a lot of prestige at playing for Alabama, and you can make a lot of money there, right? In these different scenarios. But I think at the end of the day, players want to play. Like I've never met a D1 men's college basketball player or football player who's a freshman coming into college who didn't think they weren't going to the NFL or the NBA. They all do. And great. Not criticizing them for it, but my point is you can't showcase that if you're constantly the third string. I'm cashing $100,000 a year, but I'm the third string linebacker at Alabama for 5 years, right? Like that, because they're going to keep recruiting over you if you're not good, right? Like these players want to be seen. They want to play. And that's why I don't necessarily, like, is it a doomsday deal for the Big 12 if they're making half of what the Big 10 is? Probably not. You know why? Because they've been doing that the whole time anyways, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's how I look at it from a Big 12 standpoint, is you could be in a much worse spot. And, a couple summers ago, it certainly looked like they were going to be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when Oklahoma and Texas were announcing that they're leaving, then you start to wonder, okay, who might go where and how? I mean, Kansas has the most marketable program, but it's basketball. And basketball just does not, unless you're Gonzaga or somebody like that, you just Butler maybe, you're just not going to get any kind of looks. And even then, being that far removed, I just don't know that they're I would be interested for them if it's just a basketball only deal, but I don't think they would want that. And then, so it's going to be really interesting to see what the Big Ten's next steps are, because in the fall, I think there was a little bit of a chasm between Kevin Warren and the presidents, because he wanted to continue to push and add. And they were like, no way, we do not want this. We want to bring in USC and UCLA, and that's it. And part of that was financial, because Fox, and I've talked to Fox executives who were like, we're not going to give them any more money, if they get Washington and Oregon. So therefore, if you get those two and Iowa's share goes down and Minnesota's share goes down, for what? So you're not going to play. So you don't get a 4-hour bus trip to Illinois or Northwestern or Minnesota, but you got to go fly to, Eugene, or fly to, to Seattle. I mean, come on, you're not going to play those games, but you're going to play those, so they shut that down. And I think what's going to happen with the new guy is just, okay, we're going to stand pat for a couple of years, and then maybe in 3 to 4 years, they'll reevaluate the situation.
Yeah, that's my worry for both the Iowa schools, to be honest, is if, okay, let's assume here, hypothetically, that Colorado and Arizona join the Big 12, and maybe San Diego, whatever, just throwing it out there. My worry is that Iowa State's going to get lumped in with that Western pod. And I've heard people in Iowa City told me that they were a little concerned that Iowa and Nebraska would get stuck in some sort of a pod with the California schools too. And that, it's all fun and games, I think, for fans. Like, it's exciting. Oh, we got these new teams coming in. It really does suck, though. Like, if all of a sudden, like, Iowa State's not playing the two Kansas schools and they're, but we're starting a new rivalry with BYU and Arizona. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Like, it's not good. Like, it's not good for fans. It's not good for college sports. It's just more money at the end of the day for coaches and administrators.
Exactly. And that's why the Big Ten is the scheduling situation has been so muddled from the very beginning, because and there's not going to be a pod system. It's all, and I think people keep talking about it. It's like, that's not going to happen. What that's going to happen is they're all going to be one league, and they're going to play an unset or an undetermined amount of permanent opponents and then cycle through everybody else. Like, the easiest one in the Big Ten is 3-6-6. So they play 3 opponents every year and then cycle through the other 12 twice over a 4-year period. That's easy. But then it's like, okay, but who gets what 3 teams? Iowa has 3 rivals that it wants to play: Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then Nebraska. There's a lot of equity in that series. USC and UCLA who are they going to play outside of each other? Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, so they're like, well, why should we do that? Same thing with Maryland and Rutgers. I mean, do we really have to play, so they're down to 3 finalists for this, a 3-6-6, and then maybe at the end of every 4 years, you start to cycle through some of them. So that's not as bad.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So
that's
then
good
that
to
way
hear. Because the Big 12 next year, they're doing protected basketball opponents where you play home and home with, and Iowa State got BYU, and it's just like, like, that's not good. Like, that's not good for fans. Like, they don't care about that, but it's also part of the deal. I get it. You want to be the aggressor, like we're talking about, then all of a sudden you gotta swallow when, like, you got to suck it up and swallow it when Maryland and Rutgers get added for television purposes. And that's just kind of how it goes. You don't have to like it, but it's just a sign of the times, I guess.
Yeah. So with the Big 12, I'd be fascinated if it's, as long as, to me, I think as long as and you could, shut me down if I'm saying this wrong, but as long as they play Kansas and Kansas State in football, everything else is kosher.
Yeah, I would say that too. I would protect as much of the old Big 8 that is left if it were up to me. But again, like, I'm too old school. Like, I'm the worst, Scott, because I'm the guy who for 10 years has been yelling into a radio that the Big 12 needs to be aggressive and they got to get a shark in there and they've got to quit playing defense. And now they're doing that. And now I'm the old guy yelling, but you got to protect the rivalry. Like, you can't have it both ways. And that's what I'm trying to do there. Last thing for me, if I'm Gonzaga, there's no way I'm going to the Big 12 for basketball. Like, if you look at what Butler has done in the Big East, what Wichita has done since it made its move, why would you go to the Big 12 and be this geographical outlier where, like, I mean, it's a known fact in college basketball recruiting that a lot of guys go to Gonzaga because they know they can puff up their stats in that conference. They have every advantage in the world. Like, to me, this realignment deal is just, I would love to do an off-the-record, here's an idea for The Athletic. I don't have the resources to pull this off. But if you guys go back and get all the old school guys, the Tom Osborns, the whoever was in charge of Colorado, and if you could see if they would make the move again, I would love to know what their thoughts would be on that. Because usually it just doesn't seem like it pays off that much for these schools that make the move.
Yeah, I don't want to ruin anything, but we do have what we call Blitz coming out. I think it's in June, and right now we have 58 stories on the docket that we're deciding on realignment, and it's going to be a series. Like, everybody on the college football staff will participate in. So
that sounds great.
Yeah, but I think from what I know and gathered, Nebraska would still do the same move. Colorado would not. The fans might not want to, but but Nebraska financially, it's a different world. Colorado would not have done the same move. Here's the thing about the Big 8/Big 12 Southwest Conference that I really, and I've done a lot of work on this, and I might write this angle, is Arkansas should have been in the Big 8 in the mid 80s. There were conversations even in the 70s with Chuck Ninus and Frank Broyles. In the 80s, he was talking about leaving the Southwest Conference for the Big 8. You know what held him back was the fact Kansas State was so bad before Bill Snyder. And they thought that, okay, if Bill Snyder, if Kansas State decides, you know what, we just can't compete anymore and leaves, then they could still be 8 and have Arkansas. How's that for lack of foresight? Yeah. If you have Arkansas and you're the Big 9, then when you bring on Texas A&M, I don't know, Baylor or Texas Tech, one of them, then you have another counterweight to Texas, because then sitting across from you have Oklahoma and Arkansas, and Nebraska, and Texas A&M, and then but Baylor and Tech felt beholden to Texas, so they let Texas get away with a lot of stuff. I mean, and you talk about another league. I mean, Arkansas is a powerful institution, and that might have solidified the Big 12 back then in the 90s, and it might still be in operation today.
I still think too. I know the money thing is totally gonna skew all of this, but I would make a bet here to you, Scott, a nice bottle of bourbon, that in 20 years, Texas and Oklahoma, if they're being honest with themselves, will go, man, we should have just stayed in the Big 12 and pulled a lot more strings and power moves, and especially Texas. I think that they'll look back and say, man, we would have been way better off just keep calling the shots, because you had all these schools that were letting you do whatever you wanted to do anyways. Hell, even when you went behind their back and cheated on them and left, they came back to you and offered unequal revenue sharing, from what I understand. I don't know. It just seems to me like the grass isn't always greener. I know they're going to be making a lot of money, but my God, how much money do you need? They're already rich. They're already making $30 million more than their counterparts in the league based on their network and all that stuff. But this is another pod for another day. We could go another hour on this. I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you, my friend. You've been awesome. I really appreciate you. Congrats on your big award. Much deserved. And we'll catch up another time. I'll hit you up this summer for some football talk, okay?
Sounds great, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Good luck to your venture.
Thanks, pal. I appreciate it. Scott Dochterman from The Athletic here on this week's CW Pod.